We're going to start today with just doing a question from yesterday, and sort of showing how all of these rules are getting combined to something that looks kind of complicated, but if you break it up into smaller sections, it becomes a little bit easier. So if you want, we can pause it and you can try this, and then we'll come back and watch the video, see how it goes. Otherwise, we'll go right to it. So the first thing I'm going to notice here is I've got a root x, and we know that I don't have a rule for that, so I'm going to have to replace that with x to the 1/2 minus 2, then everything else stays the same. I can use the power rule when I have it as x to the 1/2 instead of just the root. Now you'll notice that I have a function here being multiplied by another function there. So it's the product of two functions. So I'm going to use the product rule and take the derivative of the first times the second plus the derivative of the second times the first. So I'm calling this the first and I'm calling this the second. So I'm going to be very methodical here and notice that I changed my notation to y prime when I'm actually taking the derivative. So the derivative of the first is x to the 1/2. The derivative of that is 1/2 x to the negative 1/2, subtracting 1, minus 2, so the derivative of that is just 0. That's the derivative of the first times the second as is, so I just leave it like that. Plus, now I'm going to take the derivative of the second. Well, derivative of x squared is 2x, and of course the plus 1 is just 0. That's the derivative of the second times the first as is, x to the 1/2 minus 2. So there's all the calculus that has to happen, and we're actually done all the calculus. The rest is all about simplifying it, making it look like it is a little more useful. So this is one term out front, being one term here being out front of a binomial, so I'm going to rainbow that in. So the 1/2 x to the negative 1/2 times x squared. So the coefficient is x squared. Now when you multiply the x's, we use the exponent laws that tells me when I multiply powers, I add the exponents. So there's the x, and I'm going to add the exponent. So that's negative 1/2 plus 2 is 3/2. I'm going to just write that off on the side. You might want to put it in your notes that it's 1/2 plus 2. So 1/2 plus 2 is like negative 1/2 plus 4/2, which is positive 3/2. Then I'm going to finish the second part of the rainbow. So that was that rainbow. This is that rainbow. So it's times 1. So it's just plus 1/2 x to the negative 1/2. And then the other side, I'm going to rainbow a positive 2x. I'm going to rainbow the positive because it's right there. Now it's obvious that it's positive. Rainbow that. So 2x times x to the 1/2. So again, this is x to the power of 1. So it's going to be 2. And I'm going to add those exponents. So the 1 plus 1/2 is also 3/2. The second part of the rainbow is 2x times negative 2 is a negative 4x. At some point, remember, we're going to sub in x equals 4. So the question is, should I sub it in now or should I clean it up more? And really, there's no right answer to that. I like to clean it up a little bit. These fractions in the exponents all represent radical signs, so I think I'm going to convert them back to radical signs. But even before I can do that, I can actually clean up a little bit. So I've got this and this are like terms, so it's a 1/2 x to the 3/2 plus 2x to the 3/2. So over here I'm going to collect those like terms into a 1/2 plus 2. So again, it's just like the math I did up here. It's a 1/2 plus 4/2 is 5/2. And this time I'm adding the coefficients. I'm adding, not multiplying, that's why I'm dealing with the coefficients. So that becomes 5/2 x to the 3/2. This one doesn't have a common like term, so it's just going to stay as is. and the minus 4x. As I said, I think I'm going to deal with these radical signs now and try and simplify it a little bit. So the x to the 3 over 2, the 3 over 2 part, well, since it's over 2, that tells me it's a square root part. And it's being raised to the power of 3, so it's to the power of 3. You can either write it like this, or you can take the square root and write it like that. There's no right answer there. They're both equally correct. I think I'm going to write it like this. Square root of x cubed. I don't need the little 2 there for the square root. Plus, this is 1/2. So the 2 part is going to be on the bottom. And since this x is being raised to a negative exponent, that negative exponent tells me it goes on the bottom. And it's to the 1/2, so it's the square root. And minus 4x. This, to me, is the most logical spot to plug in the x equals 4. And it's kind of good that it's to the power of 4, because when I take the square root of 4 and things like that, it'll work out a little nicer. So this is 4 cubed plus 1 over 2 to root 4 minus 4 times 4. So if you do this 4 to the power of 3, you'll get an answer, and then take the square root of that. I think 4 to the power of 3 is 64, and then the square root of that is 8. This is the square root of 4 is 2, so 2 times 2 is 4 on the bottom, minus 16. 5 times 8 over 2 is 20, plus 1/4 minus 16. The 20 and the 16 gets me 4 and 1/4, which reduces to 17 over, 4 and 1/4, and I wrote down 1/2. So it's 4 1/4, so that's 17 over 1/4. There's the slope. Of course, the slope is the first part in finding the equation. So we now have a slope. We can go and put it into our y equals mx plus b version. So y equals 17 over 4x plus b. Again, using this point will help our work. The point is 4. I know that x. I wonder about what the y value is, though. So I'm going to have to go right back up to the original and say, if x is 4, I wonder what the original y is. So it would be y equals, and I got to be careful here, the square root of 4. I'm replacing this x with 4 minus 2 times 4 squared plus 1. So 4 roots 4 is 2 minus 2 is 0. And then this is going to be, well, it really doesn't matter, 17 is 0. So the y value is that. So that means the point that I'm subbing in is actually 4, 0. That'll be helpful later on. So I can sub in that point. So there's the 0, 17 over 4 times 4 plus b. The 4's cancel out nicely here. And I'm left with 0 equals 17 plus b. So negative 17 is b. Found my b. I've got my m. Those two things go together to get my equation. Y equals 17 over x, or say 17 over 4x minus 17. And there's my equation. If you had trouble with that one, that's okay. We can talk about it when I see you next.